right, so today we'll be talking about, I guess, conversions versus manual bidding. And I'm joined here with Nathan, who I actually saw on the Soleil channel. So this is actually probably our, first actual conversation. We've kind of talked a little bit over LinkedIn, but yeah, I don't know who you are. You don't know who I am really. And we're going to have this conversation.
Let's do it. I'm looking forward to it.
But yeah, so we both, like I said, both own agencies. So we both understand sort of overall trends in what works, what doesn't work. So we've tested this across multiple accounts. And yeah, a lot of the questions nowadays that I get are, do we still use manual bidding? I know some people do, some people don't. I know, Nathan, that, you've pushed manual bidding as well too, and you've seen some results there. And so if you have any insights, I guess, on what caused you to swap over from manual to conversion-based, if you can just, I guess, give me some of those insights.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably about a year and a half ago is when we switched majority of accounts away from manual bidding. And the reason being, and I made a LinkedIn post about this probably a few months ago, to try to push the point home as to why we made the change, was that back in the day, back like 3 years ago when you were doing manual bid changes at a keyword level, the only insight that you really had was the keyword. You didn't have insight into any of the psychographic data points on the actual end consumer that was inputting the search. And so when you look at two different searches, you could look at someone searching for furniture, that's it, and then someone searching for four-seater brown couch. And intuitively, you would go, okay, we want to bid on the four-seater brown couch because that's what we sell. That's going to be a much better keyword to bid on. But if you look behind the scenes, you might find that that person searching for the four-seater brown couch is a 18-year-old that hasn't moved out yet, that is just looking at couches. And then the person looking at furniture has an enormous disposable income and just moved houses 1 month ago. And so it's actually a very, very different story if you peel back the layer behind the keyword. And that's why we started finding that value-based bidding and automated bidding strategies started heavily outperforming any kind of manual bidding, because the algorithms just got way better at being able to take into consideration all of the factors that a person couldn't. And so the bid adjustments were just a lot more accurate at an individual user level rather than just looking broadly at keywords.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you bring that up, because I'll still have clients talk to me about it. And it's like, well, yes, we're not showing up all the time, but that's on purpose, right? Like, we don't want to show to someone that's already seen the website, they're not showing the actions, or, like you said, an 18-year-old or, a 70-year-old that's trying to figure out what's going on. And so it just kind of depends. And like, it opens up a lot of other issues as well too, where we run into the scenario of, yes, it's optimizing for conversions, but then we have to make sure, okay, are we optimizing towards actual cold conversions, right? So it's not just, the benefit of, yes, we get to target people more effectively, but then there's also the risk of, okay, you're giving it the handles. Now, what happens if it goes too far into, yes, all these people are converting, but no, it's just people that have already been to the site, they're already interested, and it just starts scooping up more and more of those people. And so I feel like, with all the benefits that have come from it, there's a lot more risk involved with it, but it's worth the risk. And so with that being said, I think that, overall strategies from a, algorithm perspective have just become more complex, and I actually like that. Because it allows us to manipulate not just the keyword, but also the algorithm behind the scenes. So like something as simple as, changing the bid adjustments from, or the overall conversion-based bid from, target CPA over to maximize conversions, or even upping the target CPA, can completely change the overall algorithm on what it's going to go after. You don't even have to fully change the audiences in some cases. And so that's, kind of one of those things that highlights one of the biggest points in the marketing scheme right now, I would say, is tracking your overall P&Ls and making sure that, you're aligning with, hey, it looks great, conversion base is working, it's awesome, doing better than manual, but which one actually translates to the right P&Ls? And so, that's kind of the push right now with Performance Max is, yes, it's only using conversion-based bidding, but we're opening ourselves up to that scenario like we're talking about, where yes, it might look better, but the reality is it might not actually be better. Whereas manual bidding allows you to kind of have more control over that, but you can't get those specific scenarios of, no, we don't want to target the 18-year-old kid, we want to target like the 30-year-old or whatever the case may be for the actual product itself. So Yeah, really interesting though, because there is some agencies that are still using manual to a very, very high extent. And I find it, I don't know, it just seems kind of interesting to where like, yes, if you find out that manual works, because there's are instances where manual can work, everything that we're saying is not necessarily 100% like do this. It's one of those things to where it's just best practice. And so we might be, 80% sure this works, but there's still that 20% chance that, manual might work better. But that all kind of comes down to, like I just said, the P&Ls and making sure that you're tracking overall metrics there.
Yeah, I said this, I think there were two golden nuggets in what you said there. One was that if you do go towards automated bidding strategies, you are leaning in towards the ability for the campaigns to optimize towards existing customers and existing visitors. And so it's risky. And that sort of opens up the second golden nugget, which is that media buying has shifted away from what it used to be. And I think it's shifting towards that you have to be incredibly sophisticated because you're understanding how the algorithms are working rather than how the basic placements of ads operates. Yep. And so back in the day, if you were to train someone to use Google Ads, you would say, hey, you need to find the keywords that people are probably searching for. You put them in the campaign, and then you keep an eye on the keywords. And it was very almost automatable, right? You could train almost anyone to do that as long as they had the context of the brand. But then now it's, okay, you're going to make a target ROAS change, but you better understand fundamentally how target ROAS works at an individual campaign level before you make a change like that, because it's going to completely skew all of your numbers, your top line revenue. You don't know the impact that that's going to have unless you really understand it. And I couldn't sit here and explain target ROAS in this video. Like that's a 30 to 60 minute training with a one-on-one with a person. And even then, you're probably not going to get it for a couple months down the line. And then that applies to all of the different mechanisms within Google and Facebook ads at the moment. So I do think there is this shift in media buying where it's becoming simpler from a click perspective, but really sophisticated to actually understand what's going on.
Yeah, well, that's a good point too, because every other campaign that's in the account could affect the algorithm, right? It could sway in one direction versus another. We used to do the strategy where, when we were just testing out Performance Max and seeing if it was going to be viable for us, is we noticed right away that it's starting to go more into, display traffic or YouTube traffic. It would kind of be random in terms of just based on what audience it found, it would latch onto it. And so we were like, well, okay, it's using conversion-based bidding. How can we sort of incentivize it to sort of be a kleptomaniac towards going after shopping ads? And so we're like, okay, let's pair a cold shopping campaign with Performance Max and then see how that kind of pushes it in that direction. And so it worked for a period of time, but then as, it sort of settled and sort of found the audience and then just left standard shopping in the dust, it went back into warm traffic. And so there's little changes that you can do that will affect the overall structure of the account. And so it just makes it even more important, especially when using, conversion-based bidding, to have your top of funnel, middle of funnel, and bottom of funnel all segmented, because then you don't run into issues like that. There was another strategy we did as well too, which was, only available with conversion-based bidding, and this kind of goes into how you can manipulate the algorithm, which was instead of when you go into your conversion settings, you see a every and then a only count one. So lead generation typically only counts one. eCommerce typically counts every. We wanted to say, okay, during that 90-day click window, we don't want to, count another person, even though they might purchase another product. So we swapped that on an eCom account to just count one. And that worked for a little bit of time. But once that 90-day range, ended, it started overlapping again and again and again, and then it ended up falling off. So there's little changes that you can do there that you can do with manual that can affect it, but you just have to be so aware, like Nathan was saying, that there's just so much more going on behind the scenes that little changes like that can really have an impact on a totally different campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. And another example of that on Facebook would be that default Facebook campaigns, when you create them, are optimizing for maximum number of conversions, which translating that to Google is maximize conversions. Not necessarily the greatest objective to be going for, particularly if you have different contribution margin at a product level, which is all being pushed within the same campaign, right? Because if you have one product that's incredibly profitable, one that isn't, but you're just optimizing for the lowest CPA, and the less profitable product has the lowest CPA. If you actually look down to the P&L post-CAC profit contribution number, it's the campaign is doing the wrong thing. It's optimizing for the wrong ad and the wrong product, but it doesn't have the context of the individual margin at a product level. And so I think this almost ties into, and I want to work on some kind of workshop or course around this, which is understanding how to build Google and Facebook campaigns in alignment with your business goals. Because I think that's what it's coming down to now, is understanding the business objective and then aligning accordingly.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I think that, yeah, like you're saying, P&Ls and making sure that, yes, it's going to optimize for the lowest cost product in its eyes. And, you know, that kind of goes into even like some P&L talk where it's like, yes, the NCAC might be great, but what's the AOV? Is that translating to actual LTV, right? So there's all these little nuances that I feel like before you can kind of get away with not really leaning too much into, right? They'd maybe have like 20% impact, but with all the attribution crossover now, the loss of attribution just piled on top of that, that impact is just going to get larger and larger and larger to not, you know, if you don't know your P&Ls, you're going to lose instead of 20%, maybe 40%, maybe 50% of efficiency. And that's just going to keep getting, you know, higher and higher and higher. Another thing too that I wanted to talk about in terms of conversion-based bidding is what we've seen with very large accounts. So like anywhere from, you know, the mid-size to like the publicly traded companies, is that conversion-based bidding, you kind of hit a cap at a certain point. Now this is, like I said, only for really large companies. And so what I mean by that is that there becomes a point where your top of funnel can no longer be purely just conversion-based, because it just bleeds over so much into cold and warm. They just mix match way too much. Is we go into just going back into the manual side of things in that case. But that's mainly just to generate awareness. So you don't, you know, leverage the algorithm in that situation. You're just going for awareness, but that might not be as efficient. So that's why you see a lot of large brands that will go to these publishing companies and only optimize for impressions, which is, you know, in our minds, like, what the heck is going on? But the reality is they've already maxed out a lot of what the algorithm has to offer. And so then it becomes a detrimental point there. So it's a game of, you know, at the end of the day, the algorithm's a game of just cold traffic, warm traffic, knowing what levers to pull. And conversion-based bidding is just a, you know, a tool to use to lean more into, you know, people that are more likely to convert. And so if that gap becomes smaller and smaller as you get larger, then manual starts to make more sense. But I would say for about, you know, 95% of the companies that are out there, I mean, I would say 99% of the companies out there, conversion-based is going to be mostly the way to go. Manual is going to be something that only very large companies are going to use or should use.
How do you approach that structurally? Because I'll put a caveat in there, which is I think that if you're in the Australian market, you probably hit that cap quicker than if you're in the US, because the population being 10x smaller. So it actually might make sense for, on paper, a smaller revenue-based company in Australia to switch to manual bidding much faster than a US-based company would, where they have a lot more room to grow.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to what you're kind of mentioning of like the incremental, you know, NCAC essentially. Like what we're looking at from a perspective of, hey, we put in this much conversion-based, like we've excluded cold, we've tried pushing away cold or pushing away warm as much as possible, and we just can't do that anymore. Then it gets to the point of, okay, let's go into segmentation and understand what's our top of funnel budget, what's our middle of funnel budget, what's our bottom of funnel budget. And so the way that I would approach it on that side of things would be just, okay, we have our middle of funnel. What can we do to generate more awareness, and then track that lift on the back end side and see how that kind of flows through all the other campaigns. So, you know, anything from just optimizing for views or impressions on YouTube, I mean, traffic campaigns inside of Facebook, whatever the case may be, those become more and more of a, you know, lever to pull at a smaller ratio to then test and see how that affects the rest of your funnel. And you might find out that, you know, when you make that adjustment, you teach the algorithm a whole new audience, and then your middle funnel, in theory, would then go after a whole new audience after that. And then you might not have to run that awareness for a little bit, and you can just let it capture that audience, depending on how you want to, you know, build the strategy out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think something that we've talked about a little bit here, and maybe it's another video in itself, but I think the really important part of using automated bidding strategies across Google and Facebook at the moment is ensuring that you aren't going heavily after existing customers and existing audiences, because the incentive of big tech and all Google, Facebook, and any other advertising platform is that they want to maximize revenue on platform. And the way that they do that is to attribute as much revenue as they can to the platform so that you believe that the best allocation of your free capital is to go into Facebook ads to then spend more with them. And so they're going to over-attribute wherever they can. Google's going to over-attribute wherever they can. And so getting an understanding of not just the over-attribution, but making sure that your spend isn't going into existing customers, because that's also going to shift your blended CAC or your NCAC numbers. Because when you do the NCAC calculation, it's total new customers for the month divided by total ad spend. But it technically isn't. It's total new customers for the month divided by total ad spend that went towards acquisition. And then there's an ad spend proportion that's going towards retargeting existing customers. And it's a separate P&L. So there's ad spend going to returning customer base. And so your blended CAC or your NCAC numbers might actually look a lot better than they actually are when you do the calc. Because 30% of your spend right now is going towards retargeting existing audiences because you're with an agency, or maybe you're doing it in-house, and you don't know how to properly structure and do audience suppression. And so you're just going after existing customers all the time, and you're wasting budget on getting returning customers. And this is really, really the case with CPG brands, where on a daily basis, their returning customer revenue was 60 to 70% of their total revenue. You're going to get, and I see this every single time, so much over attribution in platform, and the campaigns will just gear towards retargeting existing customers that you end up not even acquiring new customers through paid anymore. And all the new customer acquisition is coming through their other marketing efforts. And so you really have to come in and restructure the whole thing and get an understanding that Google and Facebook are trying to do one thing, and you need to pull it away and tell it to do another.
Yeah, I like the quote that Kasim said a while back, which is essentially just a big ship. Or I think it was John actually, but it's just a large ship that's moving in a direction. And like, if you don't see the signs, it takes a lot of effort to pull it out of that direction it's going into with conversion-based bidding. So like you're saying, if it's slowly moving into warm, you have to fully restructure everything. Then you have to help it essentially learn out of that whole process. And so the faster you catch it, a lot faster that you can obviously move towards cold traffic versus warm traffic, and then your business is scalable. And so I think that that's a really, really important point that you just mentioned there, is catching it as early as possible. So you have more flexibility with that. But yeah, I think that kind of sums up the majority of conversion-based bidding from just a top line perspective. I'm sure we'll probably shoot another video sometime. I don't know if, Nathan likes me enough, but
now let's do it.
Yeah, maybe we'll shoot another thing on here, then kind of go from there.
Thanks, guys.
Again, everyone.